discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, this video is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering you a free audiobook with a 30-day free trial membership. All you need to do is go to audibletrial.com/BG The link is in the description below, and now enjoy the video. Hey everyone, welcome back to Board Games Unlocked, and today I'm doing a top 10 heavy themes, a list of top 10 heavy themes. Now, what do I mean by heavy themes? And this is kind of heavy themes slash dark themes. So a lot of board games, especially of late, have been grounded in some sort of, darker meaning or themes that a lot of people feel uncomfortable playing in. And this is in no sense like a platform like top 10. There are a lot of games that I like, and there are themes that I feel that's like should be brought out, or themes that should be touched on, because there are going to be games on this list that some people are going to think, oh, that's not fun to play, like you're making light of this type of this type, and just any argument that they want to make that I personally, me myself, completely disagree with. I think that you can have fun with any theme because it's a game. Like, you're not making fun of someone's personal situation. You're not making fun of things that have happened. You can enjoy, because you should, as a logical and rightful-minded human being, be able to distinguish, a fictional board game setting from a real-life scenario. You should be able to distinguish from the two, but people can't seem to do that, and that's perfectly fine. One of the reasons, funny enough, that I'm actually, this isn't the reason why I'm doing the theme, it's just I'm doing it today, is because I just got back from seeing 2019's Joker, which, not going to go on a whole spiel about that, but that's probably one of the best movies I've ever seen. Anyway, on to the list, and I ordered this list kind of in, not necessarily in how much I like the game, which that kind of happened anyway, not sort of, but in terms of how heavy and meaningful I think the theme is. So it's going to start out kind of more in the darker realm and then go into the more heavier, difficult to talk about subjects. So with that being said, let's start with an honorable mention, which is very much the lightest game on this list, and that's why it's an honorable mention, really, and that's Gloom. So Gloom is a game where you are trying to make your family, every person has like 5 characters of their own, and you are trying to make them as miserable as possible. Now, what makes this game interesting is because it's funny. Like, all the stuff that's happening to them is funny, and whenever the whole center of the game is based around you telling a story, and your family and everyone else's family, you should all be trying to tell a cohesive story, because you can be like, oh, well, Sally was walking by the park and she got stung by bees or something, and she was, telling, like messing with something that she shouldn't, and she tripped and started off a bee's nest and she got stung by bees. And then everyone can kind of take from that and then pull their stories in, because you can also play positive cards on people to raise their score, because you want to eventually kill off all of your members with the lowest score, and you want to have the most negative score possible. But since you can play, you can kill off other people, you can play positive cards, and it's like, well, after she was stung by bees, she actually was saved by the neighborhood boy, and she found love, and that's plus 10. I mean, I'm doing a very, very piss poor job at making a story out of it, but that's kind of what you do. So because it's an honorable mention, because it's not as heavy of a theme, but the reason it's on the list anyway, or almost made the list, is because you are trying to kill people, and you have your five family members, and some of those is a dog, and others are kids, and you're just trying to kill. Well, it's very macabre kind of feeling. But if you're telling a story and you're having fun telling a story with other people, then it's funny, and I think it's a blast. So that is my number 11, Gloom. Now, on to the actual list. The number 10 is because this has to do with religion, more or less. I mean, it's not religious in any way, but it is the others. So this delves deeper into the dark aspect of things. And in all reality, a lot of games can be put onto a dark, heavy list just for their sheer nature of just them having murder or gore or demons or creatures or stuff like that. So the reason why I chose the others was because it centers around the seven deadly sins. And you, as one player, is playing one of those seven deadly sins that has corrupted preachers or corrupted homeless, and you're playing one of the sins that are trying to destroy humanity, and the opposing players are playing a group of ragtag, not necessarily heroes, but some are good, and then others are just, hey, we're not as evil as that sin character. They're trying to fight back and complete their own objectives to complete like the uh, uh, objective tree that are on each, depending on which of the scenarios that you happen to pick. And their whole group is called Faith, and that stands for something. It's an acronym that I can't remember exactly what they use, but because what makes it number 10 is because it is such a high fantasy. Obviously, no demons are coming in. There are no grotesque creatures that represent the seven deadly sins. Granted, I really like the way that they depict them, but I put it on the list because it does a really good job. One, the game is fantastic, and it does a really good job at kind of alluding to that, hey, if the apocalypse were to happen and the seven deadly sins were some type of abomination, this is kind of maybe what would happen. Obviously, you're not having, a werewolf like come in and fight against it, but it is that high fantasy, and I really like it. So that is my number 10. My number 9 kind of delves into the similar situation as the others. It's not like a real setting or anything like that. And I'm surprised it's actually at number 9. I expected it to be higher on the list just because this game is so somber. And that is Kingdom Death Monster. So Kingdom Death Monster does delve into the darker, more than heavier themes. But the reason why I think it's a heavy theme is because it's called Death Monster, or Kingdom Death, and everything revolves around death. And there is so much in Kingdom Death that can be attributed to real life scenarios. Your characters can die like that. They can, die in childbirth. They can go insane and they can kill others. You can do some very, very dark things. Whenever you think about the primal nature of humans, if you really want to get that deep into it, like there's points in the game, I guess spoilers, where you'll get to pick a principle where it's like the first time someone dies, your civilization, your settlement has to come to grips with that. Either they can be like all about survival and cannibalize, so therefore you now eat that survivor, so you always get a resource, or you can be more sympathetic and you can dig a grave for them and you get a benefit for that. So you have choices that you can actually make, and it does a pretty good job at kind of narrowing down what humans truly are if they're in their primal instinct. So, because the game centers so much around death every step of the way and all these very grim, fucked up events that can happen, the grotesque nature of the creatures that are like that you can just the way you can kill them and the ways that they can kill you, it can just get very disgusting and very gruesome. Personally, I love all that just because it's like, ooh, and I don't know what that says about me, but because it's not real, I'm like, yeah, obviously, I'm not laughing at like someone who dies in childbirth. I'm not even laughing whenever it happens in the game because it sucks because your character dies. But I can definitely distinguish, oh, this is a game. This isn't really happening. I'm not having to deal with this in a real setting. And with that being said, I should say, most of these games are obviously all fantasy, and no one should have had dealt with this. But if you have dealt with loss of any type of situation that pertains to anything I say here, I want you to understand that I'm not targeting anyone. Like, obviously, people go through some horrific shit, and I sympathize with that. But I'm in this context, I'm talking about games. So there is that. But that's Kingdom Death Monster, my number 9. My number 8 is a zombie game, and one of the only few zombie games that I actually like, and of course it is Dead of Winter. Dead of Winter actually kind of delves a little bit more on the heavier side than, obviously it's still fantasy, but because in this game zombies are secondary to what human nature is, and there's a lot of crossroads events that come up that would depict kind of what humans might do in an apocalyptic scenario. Like, they would definitely turn on one another, and it's the nature of man once again, where it's like, okay, well, we need to survive, so and then you have to deal with ravagers, and you have to deal with other people that are trying to kill you, and just try and get a one up on you every step of the way. Those are all through the crossroads, and then there are good crossroads and there are bad crossroads, and then you add the expansions, or the standalone expansion, where it includes now raiders, or it includes experiments. So now it's like, hey, some people were experimented on. It can get really dark that way. Then, just for the sheer theme of the game, everyone has a secret objective as a player, so there might be a traitor that works against one. And this is just a mechanic of the game. It doesn't say anything about the actual players, but that is a very real possibility. Then there's also the feeling of like the old and the useless or the helpless survivors that can just show up in your colony. And you still have to feed them, and they're still there. But you can't help but be like, you guys suck. Huh. And it's like, whenever you're sitting there thinking, you're like, okay, well, we need to pay a bunch of food. Great. There's so many helpless survivors, the ones that are really young or the ones that are really old. It's like, can we just not kick them out? Like, can we just kick them out? Like, please? We don't have the food. And when you think of it like that, it becomes a very somber, heavy feeling, because it's like that is what people might have to think about. It's like, if you're not pulling your own weight in a scenario like this where it's all about survival, you might get left out. You hope you don't, but you might. Or you might start thinking like, Janet really doesn't do shit. We should probably exile her. And you can exile people in this game, and they get a new exile objective, and it's like, if you really think about what you did as a player, everyone voted to kick someone out in a settlement environment where it's like, hey, you're on your own. Like, we need to do what we have to do best. You suck. Get out. It's kind of messed up. So that's why it's on the list at my number 8, Dead of Winter. My number 7 is kind of a mix of a bunch of these kinds of games, because they are somber in their nature and they are heavy if you really want to think about it. But the one that I distinctly remember of late is Chronicles of Crime, which might be like, wow, really, that one? Now, I get it. There are, out of all of them, this is the one with the most cartoony artwork, the one with probably the more lighthearted feeling, because it is a detective game. But I could easily have put Sherlock Holmes Consultant, could have put Detective, I could have put Detective City of Angels, because they all very much center around death. And there's like some fucked up reason why one person was murdered and why, and then who did, and you're trying to figure all that out. The more with all these kinds of games, it's not so much what you're doing that's heavy, it's just the gravitas of the situation that you're in. Like, a person was murdered, and you're trying to figure out why, and you have to talk to all these people and get some messed up stories. But I distinctly remember Chronicles of Crime because there is a scenario, I'm not going to give any spoilers because these are all one time, I'm not going to give any spoilers for any of them, but I distinctly remember one scenario in Chronicles of Crime that was legitimately fucked up. And I was like, you don't expect it. You don't expect it in a game that looks like all the art is cartoony, and you're like using an app, and it's like fun and electronic, and then once you start getting into it, you're like, what the fuck? Like, this is actually like disturbing. So, because all these games have their somber tone going in, and you're walking around talking to people, you're going to scenarios, going to the scene of the crime where everything's described to you, and then you have to go be like, oh wow, okay, so his head was split in two, huh? Okay, so who could have done that? And you get very engrossed, especially with the latest ones, Detective, Modern Crime Board Game, and Chronicles of Crime, which is why you get very much engrossed into the story, and you're like, it's even weirder in Chronicles of Crime because you put a face to what's happening. Like, you actually have to scan their card and talk to them, and then be like, hey, what about this? What do they call it? The garrote, the piano wire. Hey, what the fuck is about this? And they're like, yep, I did cut her in half. It's like, like I can see your picture. You kind of look like you would, but goddamn. So I just think that game engrosses you a little bit more, and because of the specific scenario, if you know, I'm not gonna say anything, but yeah, it was very, get me out of here. So that's my number 7, Chronicles of Crime. My number 6 is higher up on this list. Realistically, Chronicles of Crime could be a heavier theme, but I think with my number 6 choice, it's one up above that because it actually happened and it was very real. And that's Twilight Struggle. So, obviously, I am a young adult. I am 26 years old, so I was not around for the Cold War, but from my understanding of history and kind of like current situations, and then looking up any historical fact, and also playing this game because they do a really good job with history. This is actually a very heavy theme because it was a rough time with America and the USSR butting at heads, always on that cusp of nuclear war, which is a very scary thing that a lot of people don't like to think about because it's like, oh yeah, no, that would never happen. Well, it very much could have, especially in that time where it was always both countries trying to one-up, and there was a bunch of espionage and a bunch of tactics and scheming. There was no actual war. There was no ground, boots on the ground fighting, but there was a bunch of, okay, hey, I'm watching you. You're going to press the button? They're both just like, both countries are just like, okay, if I press it, then they'll press it. So no one ended up doing anything because it was like, well, if we kill all of them, they could easily kill all of us, so let's just not. And you kind of do this in the game anyway. You are vying for control and trying to gain leverage in other areas to outdo one another. Then there was the space race, which is just cool, I think, not really heavy in any way. It just meant a lot for both countries to be like, okay, who's the first one to space? So then there's that, then the first one to nuclear warfare. And it was just, I can't imagine, and some people still are thinking of it like this, where you never know, okay, it's today the day. Like, people would have, like, nuclear, like doomsday prepping, like, scenarios where it's like, oh, okay, let's get in the bunker, kids. You never know. Like, okay, well, they're testing more it's just all over the place, just very uneasy, like, ooh, is it today? So that's more, and once again, like, a lot of these games' mechanics, some of them are very grounded in their theme, and others just, I'm talking about just the theme alone. And as with Twilight Struggle, like, it's definitely more area control and trying to just, place tokens on the board, but the theme around Twilight Struggle is why it's on this list. So that's my number 6, Twilight Struggle. My number 5 is another similar theme as with Chronicles of Crime, but it's not that same type of game, and that is Letters from Whitechapel. So it's kind of a combination of Twilight Struggle and Chronicles of Crime. Not in gameplay at all, but that it's about murder, and it actually happens. So with Chronicles of Crime, of course, all the stories are fictional. Twilight Struggle the theme is very much real. Letters from Whitechapel, one person plays Jack the Ripper, and you are going around, like, killing wenches or prostitutes or whores, and you're killing them, and you have to make it back to your hideout before the police catch you. Which, based off a documentary that I've watched on Jack the Ripper, and based off of the historical texts that I've read, this was a very fucked up time in London. Like, a lot of these women, and as they got more and more put on, because with the expansion, the Dear Boss expansion, there's actually a name to all these people, to the wenches that you kill, if you're playing Jack, of course. And they started off modest, I guess, and then towards the end, like the final two girls, and I don't remember their names, unfortunately, but they were massacred. And if you look up Jack the Ripper victims, they do have pictures, black and white pictures. I think some of them have been colorized, but of the final girl, they had no idea who she was. That's how messed up it is. So what makes this game even more heavy is, one, because it's real, like it happened. Two, he was never caught. Like, it's like, because forensics and stuff wasn't around at that time, so it's like, hey, like, this was a real scenario, a real crisis in Whitechapel, and it's such, I mean, it's not necessarily so thematic, because you don't do anything, you're just like, hey, I'm gonna start here, she's dead, and then now you guys have to catch me. But one of the reasons why this game got brought to my attention is I very much remember a guy commenting on my video, and I can't remember if I deleted it or if I don't remember what happened, but he was very upset that I called them whores, which, I mean, you guys know the nature of my channel anyway, it's no holds barred. I just say what I say. It's like, look, that's exactly what they were, first of all, and two, you don't know them. Like, I'm not, like, intentionally being disrespectful. Anyway, I'm not going to get on that soapbox. It's a heavy theme, very much so, due to, hey, the brutal massacre of these 5 women, and that this really happened. So, that's why it's my number 5, Letters from Whitechapel. My number 4 is a game that most people probably wouldn't suspect of actually having a heavy theme. But whenever you really think about it, and Rado has actually talked about this type of theme, especially in the Legacy version, how it can be really, really dark, and that is Pandemic. So Pandemic is heavy because it's all about diseases being spread into areas of the world which are causing people to die. If you really truly think about the things as more than just cubes and actual diseases, then it's like, this is kind of dark. Like, you're having a widespread of whatever, the Black Plague, or you're having a widespread of Ebola getting pushed throughout these countries, and if you are like, wow, that's hundreds, thousands, millions of people that are just dying, and because you can't do enough to try and stop it. Or, hey, you do enough, and you eradicate all the diseases, and hurrah. But whenever it goes south, then it's like, ugh, that's a lot of people that are being affected by the diseases. I mean, you hear about widespread pandemics, I guess not really all the time, but whenever they were, like the avian flu or swine flu, it was like, hey, that's all over the place. And just the sheer amount that diseases, AIDS and all that stuff that affect people every day, that if it were to just break out and it's like bam, bam, now it's happening in Essen, and it's carrying over into Paris, and then Mulan, and then or Milan, and it's like, oh man, this is a serious situation. So to take Pandemic, and if you scale it back and you're not looking at it as mechanisms of a board game, and you really look at the theme for what it is, I truly believe it is a very heavy theme. And without giving any spoilers, Pandemic's Legacy Season 1, mainly Season 1. Season 2 is a little bit more fantasy-esque, I guess. But Pandemic Legacy Season 1 very much touches on this kind of stuff, and the decisions that you make, because it's a legacy game, can lead to drastic consequences, and that opens up the heaviness of that theme even more. A very good example of this, I highly recommend you go watch Rado's discussion of Pandemic Legacy, because he does a very good job at explaining kind of the theme that you can put yourself in with this game, or the mindset that you put yourself in when dealing with this game, and how much the theme is very heavy. So, and this is regular Pandemic and Pandemic Legacy. Iberia is actually a good one, but I'm not talking about Follow Rome. I'm not talking about Rising Tides, or Cthulhu. Those three. Rapid Response, the newest one that just came out, the real-time one, I wouldn't really count that one in either. So those four I would omit from this particular choosing of Pandemic. Base Pandemic is what I had in mind, and then Legacy, once I started talking about it, I was like, yeah, that'd be a really good one too. So those two, and Iberia, are the three that I think do a really good job at layer, especially because in Iberia, which I personally believe is the best standalone one out there, they actually give you cards and historical context around the diseases. Because in Iberia, you're not curing them. You can't cure them. You are discovering them. So whenever you're like, ah, yes, that is, oh man, typhoid? Like, yeah, that's a thing. We now know what that is. People are still dying from it because of, X, Y, and Z, but we know what it is, which is the first step. It does a really good job. So that is my number 4. My number 3, 2, and 1 are very much the heaviest ones on this list, and it's interesting and in just the sheer context. So my number 3 does delve into history as well, and there's a very specific mechanic in this game that makes this game very, very heavy. More heavy than dark. Actually, I kind of put them hand in hand, because if you do have a heavy theme, then it is kind of dark in and of itself. I will say, if you're waiting for it, I have never played the Underground Railroad, Freedom, the Underground. I've never played that. Most likely, regardless of how the game plays, it would be on this list because of that nature alone. But I have never played it, so. But my number 3 is Black Orchestra. So the whole theme around Black Orchestra is you are playing some type of organization aiming to kill Hitler. So there's a bunch of historical context in the rulebook that kind of explains certain things. It even explains the cards, similar to what Twilight Struggle does, but not to that extent. You don't have specific card or player aids that explain the history behind each card. But in Black Orchestra, your players are trying to gather enough tools to complete a mission that could potentially kill Hitler. So like, you're trying to get a suitcase bomb, and they have all these requirements. You need to get these ingredients, and Hitler needs to be in this area. And it's like, okay, I got all the ingredients, we went around the board, we got those, now he's here, so now we need to go. And then you go and you roll these dice to try and get some symbols, and if you get the certain amount of symbols, you kill him. Yay! If you fail, which, unless you get really lucky in die rolls, you most likely will the first couple times, then it's like, and you feel that crushing disappointment of like, oh my god, we just did all that work and he's still alive. So, just the sheer nature of having Adolf Hitler in a board game, it's already a heavy theme. Like, no doubt about that. I didn't choose Secret Hitler because that is just not... That's a very abstract way of thinking it. A lot of people think Secret Hitler is kind of a fucked up game because it's like, I don't want to be Hitler. Fine. Like, but you're not really Hitler. You don't do anything as Hitler. It's not like you're sitting there and you're like role playing like, kills the Jews. You're not doing that. So Hitler and his associates move around the board. His associates can fuck with you, and you're like, okay, Hitler's by himself. He can't have any of his guards, so he's finally by himself. We got the ingredients to derail his train. He's moving. Okay, now let's go. And you roll and you're like, okay, it failed. Which actually happened. Like, there was a bunch of failed attempts against Hitler. Like the bomb in Valkyrie. I think it was called Valkyrie. With Tom Cruise. Like, the suitcase bomb. Like, that, there was a bunch of reasons why that didn't work. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, if there's any history buffs out there, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, which I'm sure I hope anyone does, but he was supposed to, Hitler was supposed to be in a specific spot, but then, something happened which caused him to move, so he wasn't that much near the suitcase, and then they were already talking about it. So it went off, and it actually did cause him to become deaf in his left side and obviously extremely paranoid. So there's a bunch of historical context around this game. Now, I said there was one particular thing about this game that elevates it so high above the rest. Like, and that's because if you win, the game is set in like different, not eras but periods in time. So as one deck of cards of events, real life events that went off, as that deck runs out, it's like 1 through 8. Once the one deck runs out, then you go to 2, and that opens up new areas. So depending on when you kill Hitler, successfully kill him, in the back of the rule book, it tells you, hey, here's how many lives you saved, depending on the era that you're in. And looking at that number, depending on where you're at, obviously the earlier you kill him, the better. But it's like, that is some fucked up way to look at it. It's like, hey, yeah, oh, awesome, we killed Hitler in round 4. It's not really rounds, but in era 4, okay, we saved 600,000 lives. Jesus, like, dear God, that is... And then even whenever, if you got all the way to 7, like, out of 8, you saved, like, 100,000 lives. It's like, that's 100,000 people that we saved. Now, granted, in that sheer amount that we lost in that time of World War II and Hitler's insane butchering of the Jewish people and other people, and the SS and all those guys killing, it's like, it really puts it into perspective. So, the reason why it's not even higher up is because it's like, it's more in the past, and it's still kind of abstract. Like, all those numbers, you don't ever physically and realistically do anything. It's just, hey, here's a background of what happened. So that's my number 3, Black Orchestra. My number 2 could very much well be my number 1. My number 2 and my number 1 could easily swap. My number 2 is This War of Mine. So, This War of Mine is a game that has sparked a lot of controversy because of just the sheer amount of, like, you don't play civilians, or you don't play people in a war, you play the civilians surviving in a war-torn city. And I personally, like I said at the beginning of this top 10, I personally believe these games need to be made. It puts things into perspective, it lets stories that get brought out that otherwise wouldn't, and it lets people realize that this is a real thing. So, This War of Mine, you play civilians in a house, trying to survive, and you will try and get resources to better, soup up the house to where it's now not as cold, or you have some heating, or you have some, whatever, a bed to sleep in, just simple, things that a lot of people take for granted, and whenever then you go out and scavenge and try and get resources to come in, and then each character, because no one controls a specific character, everyone kind of controls 4 of them, up to 4 of them, and so they can become miserable, they can become hungry, they can become tired, they can become wounded or ill, and it's like you have to manage all these, and that determines how well they're going to do. And then they can all die or do something, depending on if any of those statuses get up to a certain number, and then you have to deal with their, like, epilogue and what happens, and then what other people have to deal with, because if you go out scavenging and someone dies, then you come back, and now everyone's miserable, of course, because they died, like, and it's like, everything is somber in this game. Now, if that wasn't enough of just the sheer theme, this game has a book of scripts. So, thousands of different, like, little snippets of stories that you're having to deal with. Like, I'm not kidding, and this might be gruesome for some, but there is and some spoilers, I guess, but there's a scenario in the book of scripts that, depending on, you go to a certain spot, and you might have an encounter, and depending on this, there was one that dealt with an abortion. And it was very much an abortion. It was about a girl who went in with her mother to a doctor and had an abortion. And it's like, and the mother was like, it wouldn't have survived in this world anyway. And that's a very, 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 very heavy and dark theme to deal with, regardless of your actual views on that topic anyway. And I'm not even going to go there and open up a can of worms. But those are the kinds of things that are in this game. And a lot of people, I guess rightfully so, are like, that shouldn't even be, I don't have fun playing that. Great, that's fine. Like, you are completely entitled to not being able to have fun, because the games are all about having fun. Uh, but I personally think that there's, like I said, these have ground in this type of hobby. I will defend that to my last breath, that these games and these scenarios and this stuff needs to be made, and you can have fun playing it. You can't have fun at idolizing the topic. Like, no one's like, yippee, a board. Like, no one's doing that. But you can still have fun playing the game because it's a game. Some people will never see that, and I understand that. But to illustrate my point with this, and I still very much need to do a video just talking about it, but based off my run-through, a gentleman, and I cannot remember his name, talked about, he sent me a link to what do they call it whenever, a blog, or kind of a review, his own review, over this game, and he gives explanation and backstory on how he grew up in a situation like this, in a war-torn city, and things that they had to do to survive. And he praises this game for how well it does. And he even talks about that you can have fun playing this game. It's not going to be the same type of fun as you would playing whatever, Wiz War. I don't know, I just thought about like a fun wizard game. It's completely different, but this one is a very and it unless they handled it different, which they didn't. They seemed to very much care about the subject matter they were using. You can have fun, and I very much loved reading that blog and his review over it, because it's exactly what this type of game needed. So that's my number 2, This War of Mine. Now, my number 1, like I said, This War of Mine easily probably should have been my number 1 more than anything, but I think because of the current situation that I am living in, this is the heaviest theme that I personally wanted to put on as my number 1. And my number 1 is CO2 Second Chance. So this is going to sound political, and in no way do I mean it to come off that way, and I am not kidding. I'm going to say it right now. Any type of spark of an argument in I will delete that immediately. I am not trying to argue with people. I am not trying to deal with any of that. Just by the sheer nature of me doing this top 10 anyway, it's probably going to spark that anyway. I will easily, I will converse with others. But I personally believe global warming is a very much real thing. I believe climate change is a very real thing. And the way CO2 Second Chance is depicted is every single thing is thematic, based off of the types of buildings that you build to try and combat global warming and the emission levels of fossil fuels and these archaic energy plants that are being used to try, that are already fucking up the emission and increasing the rate of global warming, and then that you are trying to combat that with solar energy, with water, with recycling, with forestation, with all that stuff, to try and survive. And the reason, and like, it's interesting because I've done a run through. Actually, I've done a run through for I've done a run through for almost all of these. I have not done a run through for Gloom. I have not done a run through for the others, and I have not done a run through for Twilight Struggle. But I've done a run through for everything else. So you can definitely go check out those games and our discussions for them if you would like. And CO2 is a relatively new one. So in our discussion, my friend and I, we were playing it, and he mentions that the game is called Second Chance because the game is very, very, very hard. And there's a couple reasons why I also think that this theme is very heavy. The reason why it's heavy, first of all, is that because this is obviously a topic of discussion that is happening today. And is a very huge topic that needs to be discussed, hopefully in a positive way. But he says that it's called Second Chance because we really only have one other chance to even do anything about it. And the other thing that I think that makes this game heavier than the rest, subjectively, is because there are elements in this game that, from a game perspective, from a game mechanic perspective, that I don't like. but from a very heavily thematic reasoning, is there are times that, based off of design, through no fault of like your own, you could play perfectly, you can still lose through emission levels just getting too high, because you place out the old plants, like it's like there are the 5 countries or the 5 continents that are like, hey, okay, well, we didn't plan in this decade, because it goes 20, 30, 40, and 50, I think is 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050. So also it's kind of set in the same era as right now, because it's 2019. Oh, man. Whoo! You have to plant, if you don't build some sort of renewable energy plant in a one of those countries, then they have to rely on old school methods to give energy to their country. So it's like, okay, well, we didn't build one, we didn't have time to build one in North America. Okay, so you take a tile and it's like, oh, I guess they're relying on coal, which is the highest, so that raises the emission up by 40. So if you're not efficient, then just the way the tiles can come out, like, you can get like 3 or 4 40 tiles, depending on how well you do. So it's just like, oh man, that sucks. Yeah, there's nothing we can do, and that is by nature, that is by Vita Lasarda's design, that humanity could have already shit the bed. It doesn't matter what we do now, like, we could still, it might already be too late. And that is a very scary and a very real feeling today. So, that's why CO2 is my number 1. And in terms of obviously everything in the game being fantastically thematic, that's why I feel like above all of these, because they're all either dark fantasy or they're historical real life situations that shouldn't be forgotten. But CO2 is very modern and very real today. That's why I put it as my number 1 as for heavy/dark themes. And that's it, everyone. That is my top 10 heavy/dark themes. Now, I want to reiterate that in no way was I trying to spark controversy with this list. In no way was I trying to personally attack anyone if they think that these games shouldn't be made. I personally think they do, but I just wanted to bring light to games that are heavier than most, but are still fun to play. I personally believe all these games are fantastic, and I want to talk about them all, but I understand if your situation, you don't want to play a game where you're trying to kill Hitler with your kids. Like, I get that, or something. But I do think that if you're not trying, that these kinds of games can definitely be talked about. They could be used as an educational standpoint, or hey, like, some of these could be played with your kids, but or with your lighter-minded friends or something like that. But that's to each their own. That's obviously very subjective. But what are heavy-themed games that you like? Let me know in the comments below. Other than that, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful whatever time of day it is for you. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this, and if you like this video, then click the subscribe button below to enjoy any video that I put out. And right next to that subscribe button is a little bell. Click that so you get notified of whenever I actually upload these videos. If you want to support the channel, you can definitely visit my Patreon page. The link is in the description below. Other than that, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful whatever time of day it is for you.